Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you all for being here and making it possible for me to have this great experience of sharing a little bit of the words of the boss. The name of the title of the 9:30 presentation that I'm going to be teaching now is Why the Telegraph Entered the World on Shavuot. Like, what's he doing talking about a telegraph? It's supposed to be Bible. Look, as long as you believe that there are two things, separate and wide apart from each other, utterly disconnected from each other, namely Bible and the world, as long as you think there is a titanium reinforced barrier between the Torah and the world, you're not going to understand how the world really works. That's not how it is at all. And something we'll go into a little more deeply this afternoon and get clearer is the fact that it is impossible to ignore the impact that the Torah has had on world history. Now, I want to give you some examples of what I mean, because I really need you to believe that in your heart, not just to hear it in your head. You really need to understand this, because if you don't, frankly, you need to get a life and find something else to do on a Sunday morning, because you'd be wasting your time. If we're not able to get past that obstacle, then we're wasting our time. The obstacle is one that is widespread. It is one that is drummed into you and indoctrinated into you by the culture, by entertainment, by media, constantly, all the time. The message is that the Bible is an irrelevant old document that, if anything, is an obstruction to progress. But it has absolutely no value and no significance to modern, rational people living productive and passionate lives. You hear this from jokes on television. You hear it the way Bible believers are portrayed in movies. You hear it in the newscasts, in the very newscasts. On CNN, Wolf Blitzer sought out an atheist in the ruins in Oklahoma. Do you know how hard you have to look to find an atheist in Oklahoma? He found the one woman who he could say, "And did you thank the Lord for your delivery?" with a smirk on his face. And she giggled nervously because she'd been primed for this before they went on camera. And she said, "No, I'm an atheist." That's part of the insidious and relentless propaganda that is beamed out at us constantly. You might say, why? Why would anybody care? Well, I would ask you in return, why do you think a group of New Yorkers have to travel to Louisiana and file a lawsuit and set up protests because one small parish in Louisiana wants to teach creation instead of evolution in their schools? Why should that matter to a group of Upper East Side sophisticated New Yorkers? They don't care about anything else that goes on in Louisiana. Why is that an issue? Why have they got to take time from their busy schedules and go to Louisiana to protest a small parish that chooses to teach that God created the world, rather than that we are here because a lengthy process of unaided materialistic evolution transformed primitive protoplasm into Bach and Beethoven? And I should mention it's rude to laugh at other people's religion. But you got to see that there is an interest. There is an interest they have in translating the Bible into something that is absolutely meaningless and irrelevant to people's lives. I'll tell you what it is. There are really only two approaches to how to organize social society. Well, let's be absolutely frank here. There's really four ways to organize human society. The fifth way is not to organize it at all. Total chaos, anarchy, disorder. And almost everybody would agree that any of the other four are better than this. Better. Because total anarchy and total chaos is how things are in certain parts of Africa, certain parts of Asia. And not only is life brutal and hard and painful, invariably it is also short. This is not a good place to be. Where there is no structure of human society, things are really not good at all. And so if we're not going to take that system of total anarchy, which isn't really a system, it's just craziness, then what we're left with is tribalism. Tribalism. Again, much of Africa, much of the Islamic world functions on tribes. Today, the governing class in Saudi Arabia are all distant cousins of the king. It's totally tribal, and it functions entirely on blood. That's how it works. What do you think of the tribal approach? Well, it's interesting to note that no tribal society has figured out how to build a bicycle factory, let alone a chip fabrication plant or a drug company. Tribal societies have literally failed. The only reason that Muslim tribal societies actually manage to drive around in fancy cars is because they have oil. But there's no productivity. As a matter of fact, there's 100 million Arabs living in the four countries that are contiguous to Israel. Right? That's Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. There's more than 100 million Arabs there. Right? There's 5 or 6 million people in Israel. Now, you know the general rule that in economics, within any region, the gross domestic product is proportional to the number of people there. Because the way this works is that each and every one of us produces a little bit more, in fact a lot more, than we need to eat. And what is that extra? How do you see this extra? Well, what do you think built this convention center? What do you think built the streets? What do you think built sewer systems so we don't have to be like a tribal society that lets the sewage run down the middle of the main street every morning? What did that? Well, you could say, well, government did that. Using what? Whose money? Government doesn't have money. It can only take money and put it somewhere else. And so one of the functions of government is to tax hardworking people, take some of that money and use it for good things. Now, we haven't seen that sort of government for years, but you get the basic idea. Tax as little as possible, don't waste the money, don't be corrupt, use it. If you've got to build a convention center, do that. If you have to build roads and sewer systems, do that. And by the way, while you're at it, maybe fix a bridge or two. And so gross domestic product is how much on average each of us produces, multiplied by the number of us there are. That's pretty straightforward. And that becomes the gross domestic product of that nation or of that society or of that city or of that county, whatever it is. So to give you an example, Rhode Island is a state that has 10% of the population of Georgia. So now what we do is we go and check the gross domestic product, and every single year, the GDP of Georgia is about how many times that of Rhode Island? About 10 times that of Rhode Island. You're going to have to work with me a little bit better than that if you want to get out of here on time. Now, that's pretty straightforward, right? So you would have thought that within a region of the Middle East, if the surrounding nations have 100 million people and Israel has about 5 million people, would you not expect the GDP of the total of the surrounding nations to be about 20 times that of Israel? It's actually smaller than that of Israel. If you add the GDP of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt with 100 million people, take away the oil, because they didn't do that, that's from God. Take away the oil. I'm talking about productivity. It's less than that of 5 million people in Israel. How do you explain that? How do you explain that? The answer is politically incorrect. The answer is very simple, and that is the Bible is a better guide to reality than the Quran. Now, you're not supposed to say this, right? You're not supposed to say this kind of thing. Now, when I tell people that a BMW is better than a Yugo, do you remember the Yugo car? Remember it? Anybody actually own one? I hope not. No, you're far too smart for that. If you say the BMW is better than a Yugo, everybody nods. Yeah, that makes sense. So how come everyone gets upset if I say the Bible is better than the Quran? How do I know the BMW is better than a Yugo? Well, I watch the performance, that's all. I look and see three things. How well does it drive? How long does it last? And how happy are the people who own them? Well, on that basis, BMW beats Yugo. And now if I compare the biblical culture to Quranic culture, how well does it perform? Well, it's pretty obvious. How long does it last? Well, we don't know. It's been going for about 12 or 1300 years. So it's been around for a while. But how well does it last in any particular culture? Well, we're not seeing a very strong durability there. And how happy are the folks who are in it? Well, how happy are you if you go about butchering people, and many of them are your own people? So why is this not a perfectly acceptable scientific statement? The Bible is superior to the Quran. I mean, what's so hard about that? And yet I know it makes people uncomfortable. It may even make some of you uncomfortable when I say that. But then that's good, isn't it? Because you didn't come here to just be massaged with warm butter. And so a tribal system really doesn't work too well. Tribal system doesn't work too well. So if we're not going to go total chaos and anarchy, and we're not going to go tribal, then what are we going to do? Well, we've got a choice. We can either go with the big G of God or the little g of government. We can either structure a society that is based on an ever stronger and ever larger, all-controlling central authority that watches everything and controls everything. What are some of the characteristics of this? Well, some of the characteristics are that people, individuals, are not that important. Another thing that's important that happens here is that you try and build dependency. You try and make all your citizens, I'm just giving you good advice. If you want to start a centrally controlled tyranny, then what you need to do is make everybody dependent upon you for money, for transport, and for protection. And so you might discover that in such a society, the bureaucrats hate private cars. Imagine that. And they do their best to force everybody into public transport. Why? Because that way, the government, central government, controls where everybody goes, when they go, and how they go. If you have cars, you are allowing people to be independent. The second thing you do is you try and make everyone dependent on you for money. So therefore, you have everybody give you all their earnings, or as much as all you can make, and then you give them back food, food stamps, cell phones, schooling for their children, medicine, old age pensions. This is why it is very difficult to ever get a politician to tell you, what do you think the absolute maximum that any American should ever be taxed is? And politicians will of any color will usually never give you a number. They'll never say, well, no American should ever be taxed more than 50%, which is ridiculous because we're already taxed more than 50%. If you add federal, you add state, you add sales taxes, and you add taxes on gasoline, and you add taxes on it. It's easily more than 50% for many, many, many people. So they wouldn't say that. So what is the absolute theoretical maximum figure that a politician believes we should be taxed? 100%. No, seriously. From each according to his ability to each according to his needs, said Karl Marx. In other words, you give us everything you're able to produce, and we will give you back what you need. Where do I know all this from? From my political classes at university? No, I never took any. I know this from a very simple 11 verses in the book of Genesis. And the whole earth was of one language and of common purpose. And it came to pass when they migrated from the east, they found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And then they said, come, let us make bricks. Is that right? Uh-huh. Like some of you think it's right, some of you are unsure. Is it right? Yes. It isn't. I just lied to you. It's not what it says. You're going to have to get a little bit more with it, folks. I mean, I know it's early in the morning, but if we're going to have to do a little departure here for remedial Bible, we're going to be here all day. I lied to you. Look, let's imagine that I would like to enlist a dozen guys here today. When we're done here today, would you guys be willing to come over to my house and help me build a deck so we can have a barbecue when the weather turns nice, and we'll have some outdoor Bible classes? Would that work? Can I find 10 guys to help me? One of you might say, how are we going to do it? And women? No, women don't know how to use tools. I'll prove it to you. Honestly now, honestly, because you're in front of a rabbi, you lie, I'll catch you. How many men here own toolboxes? Look, ladies, look around, please. Okay, now can I please ask, how many of you women own a toolbox? Are they telling the truth? Yeah. Apologies. I'm looking for 5 men and 5 women. Oh, are you saying that when women put up their hands and say they have toolboxes, they bought them for their husbands? Is that what? Aha. Now, you might say to me, well, how are we going to build that deck? That's a question that would come. Well, I'm not going to get there. All right. You'd say, how are we going to do it? And I would say, well, that's really simple. We'll go over to Home Depot, we'll buy a bunch of 2x4s, and then oh yeah, okay, fine. All of that makes sense. But how about if I went about this the other way? How about if I stood up here towards the end and I said, by the way, everyone, just before we finish, I'd really like to ask 5 guys and 5 women to volunteer to come with me to Home Depot to buy 2x4s. What do you say? Like, for what? Well, I mean, let's get 2x4s. Come on! No, but like, why? Fine, you want to know why? Because we build a deck and we'll be able to have barbecues and outdoor. Oh, okay, fine. Why didn't you say that to begin with? Right? How about I read you chapter 11 of Genesis now the way it really appears. They found a valley in the land of Shinar, and they settled there, and they said to one another, come, let's make bricks. Huh? Bricks for what? Let's go buy 2x4. What are you talking about? Only afterwards, in the next verse, well, we'll build a city with a tower. So why didn't you say that to begin with? Because in the Lord's language, the word for bricks and the word for stones are 2 different words, but they are both related. They both contain the implication of generational transmission, fathers to sons. The word for a stone is father-son. In Hebrew, compound words all make sense, right? What I mean by that is that, let's imagine I teach a newcomer to English. I say to him, a car is a 4-wheeled vehicle for personal transport. Okay, fine, I got that. Okay, now we're going to learn that a pet is a domesticated animal that costs you money to keep. That's a pet. Person says, okay, I got it. Now I say to him, could you tell me what a carpet is? He says, no, you haven't taught me that word yet. And I say, well, think about it. He says, well, are you trying to tell me it's a combination between a domesticated animal and a form of transport? No, this is English. It doesn't have any pattern to it. But in Hebrew, if 2 words make up a 3rd word, you understand the meaning of that 3rd word by means of the 2 words that make it up. It's a very important principle. So in Hebrew, for instance, the word for truth is emet. It's made up of 2 words, motherhood and death. You know why? Because all that God allows us to understand the truth of is what happens between birth and death. If you want to know about where our souls are before birth, you're not going to know that. If you want to know where our souls are after death, you're not going to know that either. Those details are not given to us, other than in general terms. But if you want to know the full truth, the only thing you can know the full truth about is that which takes place between birth and death, the experience of life. Outside of that, we don't know. That's not what God shared with us. And so the word father-son speaks of durability. It speaks of a transmission. It speaks of a relationship. Why not mother-son? Well, that's an important relationship as well. But here's the difference. And I'm going to, since I realize we've got such an aggressive and outspoken women attendance here this morning. I'm going to be awfully careful now, I promise you that. But if I had to ask you, which is a more biological, innate, emotional connection, father-mother or father-son, and which one is, son-mother or son-father, or which one is a more spiritual and leave it at that. Are you okay with the idea that every animal on the planet, virtually every mammal for sure, has a relationship with its mother, but they don't have relationships with their fathers? You know, a dog can meet its offspring 3 years later, totally oblivious, totally unaware. But a mother, llama or cat or anything, is very aware of its children for quite a long time. With people, you can walk into some of the more daunting federal penitentiaries, and you'll still find guys who have tattooed on their arm, Mom. I have never, in a lifetime of studying tattoos, I've never found anyone who's got Dad tattooed. God, I know some lady's going to stand up and say, look at my arm. You're out to get me today, I can tell. But the relationship we have with our mothers is unbreakable. No matter what happens, our relationship with our mothers is strong. Listen, how many times have you seen a serial murderer, thug, gangster, who has killed half a dozen people? This is not a question. Nobody says the alleged killer, because everybody knows he did it. And he's in court, and he's being sentenced, and the newspaper reporters find his mom. What does his mom say? He's always been such a good boy. There must be some mistake. That's what mothers say. And I don't blame mothers for saying that. My mother would have said the same thing. Dads are much more likely to say, lock him up and throw away the key. They'll be sad and miserable, but dads are much less likely to say, he didn't do it. Much less likely. In our society today, the problem is not that children are being raised without moms. The problem is they're being raised without dads. And so the word stone is something very durable and very strong. That's a father-son connection. But bricks speak of something else altogether. And here are the main differences between bricks and stones. Who created stones? God. Who made bricks? Man. Here's another difference. Every single stone you pick up, every single one of them, is entirely different from any other stone you pick up, right? There's no two stones the same. What about bricks? The whole point of bricks is they're all interchangeable. And that's why you build much more quickly with bricks, because the bricklayer just grabs whatever brick, slaps it into place. He doesn't have to say, now I need to find a brick that'll fit in this place. They're all the same. But if you build a wall out of stone, it takes real craftsmanship, because you've got to find the right sort of stone. In this story, this is not just a story, and please don't make that mistake. Chapter 11 of Genesis, those 9 verses, not just a story about some long forgotten nation and some old anachronistic incident from the past. This is a blueprint for reality. What you're looking at is a depiction of a society which always stands opposed to the Abrahamic model of society. The Tower of Babel vision of society is a centralized tower that controls everything, where every human being is trained and raised and educated to be a brick, not a stone. Interchangeable, no significance, and a creation of man. Whereas the Abrahamic model of society raises children to be stones. Each one special, each created by God, each with his special, unique place in the world. And so for that reason, throughout Scripture, when God says, build me an altar, what are we told? Build it, not of bricks, only of stone. And this is why, traditionally, going back to colonial times in the United States of America, when important buildings are to be constructed, they build them of stone, because there's something special about it. And so right at the beginning, in the opening verses of chapter 11, we have a depiction of one of the forms of human society. So yes, we have total chaos and anarchy, but that's a really bad way to live. Another way to live is tribally, and believe me, unless you're in the right tribe, that can be very painful. Another way to live is the Tower of Babel model. What is the Tower of Babel model? It's to teach us that the fatal seduction of socialism is built into the world and built into the human soul. In every epoch, there will always be people who are seduced to the model of socialism. Very often for sincere and good reasons. But if somebody's wrong, it doesn't really help me that if he's wrong for the right reason. I'd much rather he was right for the wrong reason. If somebody's going to hurt me but loves me, I'd really much rather he hated me but was nice to me. I'd rather people are right for the wrong reason than wrong for the right reason. So people say, well, if you want to be compassionate, you've got to care about people, you've got to be so. It's wrong, it's not true. But it produces misery and sadness. And so that leaves only one more model, and that is the Abraham model of human society. That's the alternative. The big G of God or the little g of government, that's what's going to shape us. That's what's going to make this work. And depending what way you go, the results are going to show very, very clearly. What I mean by that is that you can take a look at Israel's performance compared to its neighbors, and you say, wait a sec, they got something that the other folks don't have. What is it? There's a blueprint from the God of Abraham. Now, does everyone in Israel follow it meticulously? No, not even close. But following the right blueprint, 10%, will get you further than following the wrong one, 100%. That's clear. And this would help explain something else. And this is one of the biggest mysteries that is probed in university after university. Book after book has been written, and they keep coming out. The most recent one by Neil Ferguson called Civilization. Here is the question. Again, a politically incorrect question. But it's only politically incorrect because foolish people think the answer is racial, and it isn't. Here's the question. Why is it that between the years 1000 and the year 2000, 97% of all scientific developments and all medical advances all came from Christian countries? There's lots of other places. Why is it that the Industrial Revolution, steam engines, Novocaine, airplanes, all of these come from Western, what I call Western civilization? How come they didn't invent antibiotics in Zimbabwe. They didn't. How come the internal combustion engine didn't get invented in China? Ladies and gentlemen, what I call Western civilization is a tiny part of humanity. How do you explain the fact that all of these scientific advances that the whole world wants, believe me, in the Arabian desert, living under tents, the sheiks who can afford it have cable television? That was not invented in Mecca or Medina. That was invented in London and New York. Why? Isn't this a good question? Now you understand why they're very uncomfortable asking this question on university campuses, because deep down, because they're all racists, they believe deep down that the answer is white people are smarter than black people. That's what they believe. Or white people are smarter than Arabs. So they're scared of the question because they're frightened that that's the answer that's going to come out. And it's not the answer at all. The answer is very simple. The answer is Western civilization grew out of the Bible of the God of Abraham. You don't believe me? It's very simple. It's really very simple. The printing press, 1450, Johann Gutenberg. It was more important a breakthrough than the internet was in our day. That's how big the printing press was. If you try and think what it meant, today, I don't think there's anybody here who doesn't own 100 books. Before the printing press, ordinary folks like us couldn't afford one book, let alone 100. Right? I've got 3,000. I wouldn't have been able to afford one. Because the only way to get a book was to pay a man's salary for a year and have him copy you out a book. That was the only way to do it. Johann Gutenberg comes along, invents the printing press, changes the world. What is the very first book he printed? And I'll give you a clue. It was not the Austrian telephone directory. What do you think was the first book he printed? The Bible. Nobody said, why is he choosing the Bible? It was obvious. This is the founding document of our culture. We today live in the only time in the last 2,000 years. This is the first moment in all of human history that people who are utterly ignorant of the Bible consider themselves educated. Never been a time like that before. There are people who consider themselves sophisticated and educated, and they are not even embarrassed to be biblically illiterate. And I'll explain more of this after lunch. But the point you need to get clear is that the reason that Western civilization developed all the technology that the whole world wants is because of the Bible. I'll explain later on how that worked, why it worked that way. But we've got to see that when we're studying the Bible, what we are really doing is we are learning how the world really works. Now, I'm going to need everybody to work with me a little bit. You're making me feel a little bit like a motivational speaker in a hospice. This isn't any good. This isn't any good. I mean, we need full participation. Now, I'm worried about the folks at the back because I think folks choose to go sit in the back so they don't have to participate. But I see you and you can run, but you'll never hide. Okay, we need to know that. I need to get some feedback, right? Otherwise, there's no psychic stimulation here. You don't have to agree with me. You just have to react. Okay, so 3,325 years ago, an extraordinary thing happened. Why do I say 3,325 years ago? Because my folks have been keeping an accurate calendar. So it happens to be 3,325 years ago, 3 weeks ago, that on the day of Shavuot, God gave the Torah to humanity. That's what happened. And this day on which it happens, Shavuot, it's kind of interesting because as a holiday, it's not designated by date in the Bible. I'm sure you're all familiar with that, and I know that you've been talking about that for weeks, I'm sure. Pastor Mark Biltz is very knowledgeable in this area, and it's not mentioned. I mean, the holiday is there, but it doesn't say on the 6th day of the month of Sivan like it does for all the other holidays. You know what it does say? You must count. You must count 7 weeks, 49 days, and the 50th day will be this day. And sure enough, that's exactly what they did, the exodus out of Egypt, and they went ahead and they counted, and eventually on the 50th day they're at Mount Sinai, and God gives the Torah, and everything changes. The world is now a different place. God has basically given a textbook to how the world really works. Thank you. Exactly right. And therefore, the day becomes kind of important and kind of significant. And soon after that, the tablets, and the first tablets got broken, second tablets put in a special ark. The special ark, like all the other articles of the tabernacle, had to be portable because they're going to be carrying them. At this point, they weren't planning on carrying them for 40 years in the desert, because the decree of 40 years only followed the report of the spies, which hadn't happened yet. But in order to carry the tabernacle from Sinai into the land, the promised land, each article was going to have rings on the side of it through which staves were put, and then a whole bunch of guys, and girls, could would put them on their shoulders, and that way they'd be able to lift up some of these heavy things, like, maybe 9 people, 3 on each end, the 2 staves. That's the way they carried the gold candelabra we call the menorah. That's the way they carried the altars. And of course, that is the way they carried the Ark of the Covenant, with one difference. And that is that when they came to a campsite, the Ark of the Covenant never had the rods removed. Bible says the rods have to stay there. What's more, here is something really strange. The Ark of the Covenant stood in the Holy of Holies of the Tabernacle. And the rod, now between the Holy of Holies and the main part of the tabernacle, was a curtain, a fabric curtain. And the instruction was to place the Ark of the Covenant inside the Holy of Holies and to push it forward until the rods, the staves that were used to carry it, were pushing up against the curtain. And then push the Ark of the Covenant even a little bit more. Now I ask you, think for a moment, what would that look like from the public side of the curtain? What would they be looking at? What would it look like? Way there at the back, what does it look like? 2 rods pushing into a curtain. Now look at it from the other side. What does it look like? Sorry? Well, you can't see the rods. They're behind the curtain. All you can see are 2 protuberances. Sorry? Yes, it would have to be a guy who'd give me the answer. It looks like a pair of breasts behind a tight sweater. Didn't you know that? Sure. By the way, how many of you know what food is traditional to eat on Shavuot? Dairy food, only foods made of milk. I wonder why. Since the contents of this box are the Torah given on Shavuot, and the box itself seems to be responsible for creating the appearance of breasts, wow, what a coincidence, excepting that in the Lord's language there is no word for coincidence. Coincidence is an obscenity. Coincidence is an English word that camouflages God's role in everything. When you say, oh, I guess it must be a coincidence, you're condemning yourself to not investigate what really is the cause. That's why the word coincidence is not a real word. It's not a real thing. There is no such thing. So now, let's take a look. In the Sedra, in the Torah reading of Baha'alotcha, which I think, Pastor Mark, you spoke on yesterday. Listen to this. Moses heard the people weeping. Right? The Torah is being given, and the people are weeping. And Moses says to God, why have you done evil to your servant? This is the book of Numbers, chapter 11. Why have I not found favor in your eyes that you place the burden of this entire people on me? Did I conceive this nation? Did I give birth to it? That you say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a suckling, giving them milk, of course, right? Moses is saying, God, are you expecting me to provide them with milk? Which is really interesting, because right after that, 2 men remained behind in the camp. The name of the one was Eldad, and the name of the second was Medad, and the Spirit rested upon them. They had been among the recorded ones, but they had not gone out to the tent. They prophesied in the camp. And Moses was told, and they said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. You must do something about it. And Moses said, hey, I wish everyone, the whole nation, should be able to prophesy. We're not trying to build a Tower of Babel type of culture. We're trying to build an Abraham type of culture, where everybody should be connected with God. Why does a Tower of Babel kind of culture try and antagonize religion? Whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's China, whether it's Cuba, or indeed, I'm sorry, but the United States of America today, hostile to Christianity, very hostile to the Bible. Why? Because when you are a tyrannical government, you want total commitment of everybody to you. And if there's somebody called God who requires our primary obedience, no tyrannical government likes that. You have to wipe out religion. Religion is always the flashpoint of rebellion. Who is it who ended slavery? Who motivated America to end slavery? It was religion. It was the churches of America. What part of America fought and stimulated and was committed to the War of Independence against the British? It was the churches. They called them the black-robed regiment, the pastors of the day, the clergymen of the day. What's going on? Always, you do your best to try and subdue and suppress religion if you want a Tower of Babel type government. If you want an Abrahamic type of government, you want everybody to be connected to God. Because the truth is, and we can see this ourselves today, there are not enough policemen in the country to police all the policemen who are policing us. If the only way to maintain good behavior is by police and video cameras, it's doomed to failure. There's another way of bringing about good social behavior, and that's God. And that's your choice. So Moses says, hey, I'm happy that Eldad and Medad are prophesying. No problem. But wait a sec. How often do you find heroes of history with rhyming names? Eldad, Medad. How many? Go on, name 2 heroes of the American Revolution that had rhyming names. Name 2 people in your company where you work that have rhyming names. It's not common, you know. This is very unusual. Isn't that weird? Well, guess what those names mean in Hebrew? Eldad and Medad. Every name in the Bible is significant, right? It's not like somebody's called Agatha, so they're called Agatha, fine. But in the Bible, every single name means something relevant to what we have to understand here. Eldad and Medad. Well, El means, no, that's Al. For instance, the Israel airline is El Al, means 2 on top, because they view Israel as being higher. So 2 up is El Al. So El means 2. How about May? From. Means from. So Eldad means to the Dad, and Medad means from the Dad. Now all you have to know is what a Dad is. The answer is it is a nipple on a breast that releases milk. Yeah. So Eldad and Medad are to the breast and from the breast. This is interesting. So it seems as if it's almost inseparable, that somehow the theme of milk is really tied into the theme of giving of the Torah. How does that work? What's going on there? And the answer, in order to understand the answer, we need to go back to the land of Egypt. One of the things that slavery does is that it shatters human relationships. Everybody who's a slave, to keep alive, will betray family members, will betray friends. If you're a slave, all you want to do is be in good with your boss, with a master. That's what you want to do. We'd all do that. It's survival. It's not nice, but when push comes to shove and death stares you in the face, as it does very frequently in slavery, you'll do anything. You'll do anything to stay alive. Relationships fall by the wayside. Family relationships, social relationships, all fall by the wayside. You will find exactly the same thing in slave societies like the Soviet Union or Cuba or China, or God forbid, the direction in which our country has been going for the last few years. A move towards a socialist society which views all the citizens as slaves to the society. That's how we're viewed. Slaves give all their work to the boss, and they get everything they need from the boss. Not everything they want, but everything they need. And that's exactly the deal we're making with our governments, because we are buying the promise of security. Not freedom, security. Very seductive. And so in Egypt, that's exactly what happened. Relationships are shattered. People don't talk to one another. By the way, in the Soviet Union, a lot of the literature of that period speaks about how frightened people were of talking to their neighbors, because the neighbor might betray them. And if people wanted to listen to a foreign broadcast, if they could even find a radio that received foreign broadcasts on the shortwave, they had to use earphones because walls were thin, the neighbor might hear and turn them in. People didn't have relationships. There were no parent-teacher associations. There was no such thing like that in Soviet or communist China, Soviet Russia. There's nothing like that in communist Cuba. There's no PTAs, there's no Boy Scouts, there is no place for people to connect. There's no churches, and that's because that kind of civilization doesn't want people connecting with each other. They want everybody connecting to the central tower mentioned in chapter 11 of Genesis. And so we start off, and the bread that we have to take with us out of Egypt we call it matzah today, indigestible crackers, and we are supposed to take that out of Egypt. And it's kind of interesting because we're told, prepare the matzah, prepare the dough, and then make matzahs right away because we're in a hurry to get out of Egypt. And then it says, now make sure you allow me to keep my promise to Abraham, who said, remember God said to Abraham, your children will be slaves in a strange land for 400 years, and then afterwards they will go out with, hello? Afterwards they will go out with great wealth. So God says, listen, I want you to know I keep my word. I promised Abraham that they'd go out with great wealth. So now I want you to go to all the banks, all the safety deposit boxes, all the jewelry stores, take all the money of Egypt, everything you can find. I want you to take it. How long do you think that took? A day? Half a day? How long does it take for bread to rise? My wife, Susan, who's outside at our book table, will tell you she bakes bread for Shabbat every Friday. And my daughter is there also, Tamara. She bakes special challah bread for Shabbat. How long does it take for bread to rise? 2-3 hours. Isn't this like an anti-Semitic stereotype? Hurry, hurry, hurry. There's no time. We've got to get out of Egypt. We've been hundreds of years as slaves. Now we've got to get out. There's not time for the bread to rise. But wait, there's plenty of time to go get the money. What's that about? So clearly, this matzah has an existence independent of the time. Even if there was a lot of time, the matzah still has to be matzah. You know why? Because it is called the bread of poverty. Lechem oni. Sometimes, by the way, incorrectly translated as the bread of affliction, only to the extent that poverty is an affliction. Poverty is not a virtue, it's an affliction. To that extent, matzah is the bread of poverty. Now, on Shavuot, 50 days later, a special sacrifice is brought, a certain food is brought out and placed on a table. What's that called? Bread. Regular bread. And so we have a 50-day spectrum line right here that I'm holding up in front of your amazed eyes. At one end is Passover, Egypt, and the Exodus. At the other end is Sinai, Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, and there's a 50-day period separating them. At this end is bread of poverty. What do you think we call this kind of bread? Wonder bread? Well, kind of, yes. It's the bread of money. Sure. And if you don't believe me, look how many languages and how many cultures use the language of bread as a metaphor for money. Have you ever heard people say, can you lend me any bread? Or sometimes dough, right? Same thing. That's where it comes from. That's the concept. That bread of poverty, somehow we have to get from the bread of poverty to the bread of wealth. And it stands on that table. And that table is placed in the Holy of Holies, in the Tabernacle. And alongside it there in the Tabernacle is also placed the menorah for light. And ancient Jewish wisdom teaches the following: he who wishes for wisdom should pray facing the menorah, because light, well, think about it. Cartoon artists who want to show that a character in a cartoon frame got a great idea, how do they show that? Remember the light bulb? Or how about the word enlightenment? If you want to become wealthy, pray facing the table. That's what it says. Because this table has upon it the 12 breads. And bread is a metaphor for money. So we go from matzah to bread, from the bread of poverty to the bread of wealth, 50-day cycle in between, and we go from slavery to freedom. We go from slavery with no human connection damaged, all the way to somehow human connection being strengthened. By what and how? Well, the journey becomes very important. And what's more, every day of the journey is counted. Right? Every day of the journey is counted. Interestingly enough, in the Lord's language, there are 5 words for counting: poked, nosei, sofer, moner, and what did I say? Poked, sofer, nosei, moner, and one more that'll come to me in just a moment, choshev, cheshbon. And that's the one that's used to name an accountant in Hebrew. Zroe cheshbonot. So those are the 5 words. Now here's the crazy thing. Every single one of those 5 words in Hebrew that mean to count also mean important, somebody special. That's weird. This is a little bit like Sesame Street, where the character who does the counting is the count, an aristocratic person. They captured that same idea because the writers of Sesame Street were Jewish. It's true, it's true. And they recognized this idea that locked into the essence of counting is the idea of importance. Every one of these words has a dual meaning: counting and important person. In one case, a president, a prince, an elected representative. Everyone, always. Why? Because by definition, when you count, if you count something, you can be at one and the same time denigrating the individuality of the thing, and you can also be elevating it. And one of the reasons that God punished David for counting the people was because he was counting in a way that just wrapped everybody up. I wasn't interested in the individuals. I just want to know how many people are available for the military. So everyone's just a commodity. I don't care about the individuals. Bang, punishment, finished. No good. But if you count so that each and everybody matters, in the way you count your money, how many $100 bills, you may not know how many cents you have on you, but you probably know how many $100 bills you have on you, because we count things that are important to us. And so is everyone aware that there is a counting period from Passover to Shavuot? Okay, the counting of the Omer. We're counting each and every day, making sure that we understand the importance of each and every day. How do we understand the importance of each and every day? Well, part of that is the idea of joining together, connecting with people, because if you live by yourself and you're totally isolated from other people, days blur and meld into one another. When you're with other people, there's birthdays, there's anniversaries, there's celebrations, and every day is something new and something significant. And so the message is coming across that you have to start rebuilding your relationships with each other. You had no relationships with each other in Egypt. The result was poverty. The result was bread of poverty. And now you got 50 days to restore your relationship, so you are entitled to eat the bread of wealth. Wonder bread. building relationships. Now, there is a tradition that is told of in ancient Jewish wisdom that Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the critically important sages in the transmission of ancient Jewish wisdom from Sinai to the present day, he was a vital link in that chain of transmission. He had 24,000 students, and they all died in this period between the counting. Why? Because they didn't treat each other with respect and affection. Wow. So why at this time? Because this is the period of time leading between Passover and Shavuot. That's a period of time dedicated to building relationships, connecting with each other. It's the time that we are most vulnerable if we don't do what we're supposed to do. You know, if sometimes parents are celebrating a wedding anniversary and their kids are just being absolutely rotten. And sometimes parents will say, you know, this was supposed to be our happiest day of the year, it's our wedding anniversary, you're totally spoiling it for us. That's kind of how God felt when the students of Rabbi Akiva treated each other without respect and affection, exactly on this period of time. This is the period of time dedicated towards building relationships. They didn't do it. And so finally, they arrive at Mount Sinai, and they've been working on this. And that is why, for the only time in the whole of Scripture where it speaks about the camping of Israel, every time it says, and it says over and over again, and they camped in this place, and they camped in this place, and they camped in that place, and it's always the plural, they camped. The one exception is at the foot of Mount Sinai, where it says using the singular. In Hebrew, there is a singular and plural. See, in English, it's hard to hear. In English, if I say he camped or they camped, I'm using the same verb, camped. And ordinarily, that verb has to match the number. So if it's 20 people camped, you have to say they camped. If one person camped, you have to say he camped. The verb used for the word camp at the foot of Mount Sinai in chapter 19 of Exodus, and he camped, singular, as if the millions of people that were the Israelites were like one person. They'd achieved total unity and total connection. Now, wait, it gets better. It gets better. Have you noticed how many words, how many sentences in the Torah begin with the word and? Right? About 50-60% of the words in the Torah, the sentences in the Torah begin with the word and. In Hebrew, this is why everything fits together in the Lord's language so beautifully. Listen to this, you're not going to want to lose this. What is the Hebrew word for and? It's one letter, the Hebrew letter Vav. That Hebrew letter Vav, like all Hebrew letters, that letter means something. Do you know what the word Vav means? A hook. And what does it look like? Looks like these hooks you put in the wall to hang teacups from. It's a hook. That's what the letter looks like. That's what it is. What is a hook used for? Joining. So the word and, which is a joining word, you remember from second grade they told you that? Nowadays they cover it in English 101 in college. And is a joining word. So more than 50%, nearly 60% of the verses in the Torah are linked to one another, right? It's wild. Why? Well, it gets better. Throughout, if you take the whole of Tanakh, all the prophets, all the writings, Proverbs, Psalms, all of these, what percentage of sentences begin with and? About 40%. So about 50-60% in the Torah, about 40% in the rest of Tanakh. Now let's go to the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth is the only book in Tanakh what percentage of sentences begin with the word and? over 90. Now, does anybody know what book we read on the holiday of Shavuot? Wow! The book of Ruth. And so the holiday that is devoted to connectedness, the holiday that allows you to connect and encourages you to connect, is the holiday on which we read a book that is filled with vavs and connectedness. By the way, the word vav is used in Exodus in the description of the construction of the tabernacle. A certain amount of silver had to go towards making the vavs, because the whole tabernacle is held together with hooks. That's the same word. It's all connected. God is telling us something here, which is if you want to go from poverty to prosperity, and you want to go from Passover to Shavuot, and you want to go from the bread of poverty to wonder bread, then you have to connect. These 50 days are to connect. Now, what has this got to do with anything? Well, interestingly enough, any of you remember a book called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell? He discovered something very interesting. Actually, I'm not sure he discovered it. He mentions it in the book. I think it was someone else who discovered it. What they did is they did an investigation of wealthy people in America. What distinguished wealthy people? They were not all Jewish, a lot of them were. But what distinguished wealthy people? And leave aside the outliers. Leave aside the Bill Gateses and the Warren Buffetts and the Larry Ellisons, where it may or may not work, but for the vast majority of very successful people, financially successful, what distinguishes them?
They were like-minded.
No. I'll tell you what did it. This is the test they did. Giving is also very important, and I'll come to that. But the most important thing of all was they had everybody in the test. They had them list the number of people who would take their phone call. How many people are you close enough with that if you call, you won't get the secretary saying he's in Honolulu? How many people will take your phone call? Ladies and gentlemen, in all seriousness, I urge you, before the end of May, to compile a list of how many people in your life would take your phone call. Leave out relatives. Leave out people who owe you money. How many people other than that would take your phone call? And here's the bad news and the good news. It won't take you that long to do. Right now, you probably think to yourself, wow, I can't do that. It's hundreds of people. It isn't. I wish it was, but it isn't. It's a lot smaller than that. And the reason I say you should write it down is because at the end of June, you should do it again. And if that number hasn't grown, don't be surprised that you're not making more money. That's the message of the journey from Passover to Shavuot. Connections are what take you from the bread of poverty to the bread of prosperity. And that's why the book of Ruth begins off with the story of there was a man from Bethlehem. Who knows what Bethlehem means in Hebrew? House of bread. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about bread and milk today. What is the milk? The milk is the most fundamental connection of all between mother and child. The most fundamental connection. If you're a person and your mother decided never to give you milk, you're not here today. If you're here, it's because your mother gave you milk. It's the most fundamental connection there is. Absolutely foundational. And so, on the day that we celebrate God's giving the Torah to humanity through Moses and the Jewish people, we have to look at breasts, and we have to think of Eldad and Medad, and we have to relate to eating milk. Why? Because we're all about relationships. We're all about building connections. We're all about expanding our connectivity to other human beings. so that all of God's children can be unified in one family of love and devotion. All of that. But you've got to be able to see the pattern. You've got to be able to put it together. You've got to see the hook that connects. Do you follow what I'm trying to help you get across here? When I will explain a little later today that not only did 97% of all the scientific, technical, medical advances of the last 1,000 years of human history come from Christian societies, how about if I tell you that no capital market ever grew indigenously in a non-Christian society? Oh, today you have stock exchanges in Nigeria and in Tokyo and in Singapore, but the stock market, the whole concept of capital, only grew up under Christianity. Why? That's a big mystery. Is it because white people are smarter? No, it's because Western Europe had the Bible. Why did Western Europe have the Bible? Well, it's very simple. Because Jesus was a rabbi and a Jew, and he took it, and you know that he observed Shavuot, and he taught that to Western Europe. He taught that to a group of people. He didn't teach it in Africa. Now it is. Now it's being taught there. He didn't teach it in China. Now it's being taught there. But he taught it to the people, the Greeks and the Romans, and these are the people who carried it. And that way it spread through everything we know as Europe. Christianity was very effective in evangelical activity, and it spread there, and it took root there to the point where that became the religion of Europe. That became the central driving force, whether you were Catholic until 1500s, and then there were Protestants. And what happened? Originally, you might remember, Tyndale got executed for translating the Bible. Why? Because everyone knew the power of the Bible, and until then it had belonged to the Catholic Church. And taking it and sharing it with everybody gives everybody the same power. And so Tyndale was executed. Later on, Wycliffe translated the Bible, didn't get executed, and just after that, Gutenberg developed the printing press, and then came the Protestant Reformation. So a lot of things happened in this period of time where all of a sudden the Bible that was inaccessible became accessible, and for the first time in history, Christians were taught to study the Bible. Are you surprised that Christianity produced all the great advances in finance, in medicine, in science? Of course. How can you go wrong if you're using God's blueprint? And later on this afternoon, I'll explain exactly how it works. But the mechanism is very important. That's what happened. And God took us on this journey from the poverty of Egypt to the prosperity of Shavuot, along a 50-day journey of building relationships and building connections. No relationships, no connections, you don't make money. Does this mean God wants you to make money? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I'm not in the least bit surprised that a good and loving God who wants us to take care of our fellow human beings, his other children, why would I be surprised that he rewards us with a great blessing of wealth? And think about that. We use the word customer service and worship service. Why? Because there's two ways of serving God. One way is to pray to him, and the other way is being good to his other children. Don't you like people who do nice things for your kids? God likes people who do nice things for his other kids. How do you do nice things for other people? You make software that can make their lives better. You invent a car. You invent an investment. You come up a medicine. You come up with something. By the way, does getting paid for something remove the virtue of the action? Don't believe that for a minute. Let me be perfectly candid. Who's done more for humanity? Bill Gates or Mother Teresa? How many people has Mother Teresa helped in her life till she died? How many human beings? I don't know the number, but it's more than 10, right? Is it as many as 1 million? Hard to believe. So would you agree that Mother Teresa helped somewhere between 10 and 1 million human beings? And she suffered, and it's beautiful and it's holy. How many people has Bill Gates helped? Be honest. Millions and millions and millions. The reason I know it is that you're all using his software, unless you're an Apple enthusiast, in which case I can speak about Steve Jobs. And somehow we've all been distorted into an evil way of thinking that because he got rich doing it, he's not a good guy. He is a good guy. I'm not saying you have to send him a postcard of gratitude, because you already said thank you when you paid the price of the software. But you wouldn't have got the software if it doesn't improve your life. Somebody did you good. I guarantee you, God smiles on Bill Gates for the very simple action that he's helped millions of God's other children. I'm not saying you have to be filled with the heart of service and dedication. You remember I told you I'd rather you do the right thing for the wrong reason than the wrong thing for the right reason? What would I rather have? A neighbor who in his heart doesn't care too much about Jews, to tell you the truth. But in all the years we've been neighbors, he's always taking care of my house. When my hot water tank burst, he got the plumber. I was away on vacation. This is a great neighbor. I've got another neighbor who loves me. He tells me that all the time. But he kicks my kids, killed my cat, and keys my car. What do you rather have? Action or intent? Action always. Only God judges what's in our hearts. We human beings must judge on behavior and action. When I check out of a hotel, like all of you, I leave $5 or $10 on the table for the housekeeping. I don't know the housekeeping person. She doesn't know me. But you know what? When I checked into that hotel last night, tired and weary from a trip, and I came in and everything was spotless, and there were no cigarettes in the cigarette ashtray, and the bed was clean. The bathroom looks like no human being has ever been in it. It's spectacular. You know what? I'm filled with gratitude. I am. I benefited from what that housekeeping person did. That's the way we've got to think of this. And if you don't have a lot of connections, you don't have a lot of people you can do things for. God wants us to be rich? No, I'm not saying that. He wants us to find a way to serve a lot of other people. It's called customer service, same as worship service. Serve his other children. Don't be surprised that the result is the great blessing of wealth. Money is the result. It isn't the action. The action is, first of all, connection with other people. A united feeling with other people. Yeah, the Torah is fantastically useful for that. It's immensely valuable. Because it makes us like-minded, which is what somebody said a little bit earlier. But here is this whole message that is consistent throughout the Torah of connection. Everything connecting with everybody else. The vav, the hook. The Torah serves as a wonderful unifier. Because when we have a like-minded view of reality, we're able to build relationships that have meaning. It's sheer folly to marry somebody who has a totally different view of reality from the way you do. And so God gives the world a unifying tool called how the world really works. He called it the Torah. But that's what it is. It shows us the reality. And if we then structure our lives in accordance with that reality, we are not only doing good, but God promises us we'll also do well. How many times have you read in the Torah, what is the blessing for following these words? Is it 70 virgins after you die? I don't think so. It's what? Yes, it's blessings. It's blessings in this world. That's the way it works. That's what we're talking about. We've got to understand it. We've got to understand the meaning. Sometimes it's only in the Hebrew that this all comes out and becomes easily understood. But that's what I'm here for. Because I like saying everybody needs a rabbi. Now, I'll admit that sounds somewhat self-serving, I understand, because obviously I want to feel needed. And why do I want to feel needed? Well, people who are not needed starve. Wouldn't you agree? And so this would explain the grace after meals that we say after a meal has an amazing sentence in it. We say, thank you, God, King of the universe, Master of everything, who has created so many human beings, all of them with their own needs. Why do we thank God? Well, after I've had a meal, why do I thank God for creating people who are needy? Because if everybody doesn't need anybody else, then everybody starves. What creates wealth? Transactions, human interaction. Every time I hire the teenager down the block to mow my lawn for $20, and I use the hour and a half it would have taken me to serve people at a higher level, he makes money and I make money. Every single time I find a way to have somebody else do a transaction with me, I've made money. But the only way to do that is to have a connection and a relationship with those people. And so that's why I say I like being needed. Everybody should like being needed. If you're not needed, you're not making money. And if you're not making money, that's a sign that you're not serving other people. That's how the world works. That is God's model. I'm very blessed. Pastor Mark has given me a time which I'm now out of, and so I'm going to quit for lunch or quit for whatever comes next on the schedule. And I'm blessed because we have an opportunity to take this further a little later after lunch and start bringing it to, if you're okay with that, we'll continue with that. Because I really don't want to bore you. That would be terrible. But what I do want you to see is that the structure of Torah contains the secrets of how the world really works. And if you know how to implement these in your lives, your life is better in every possible way. Not just spiritually, but also materially, significantly better. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to give you my website because I do send out a weekly thought tool. How many of you receive my weekly thought tool? Okay, not nearly enough. It's free, and it goes out every Wednesday morning. It'll land in your box. Here's the great thing about it. Do you know how long it takes me to write a 3,000-word article? I can write a 3,000-word article in about 3 hours. Do you know how long it takes me to write a 700-word piece? 10 hours. It's true. It takes much longer. I keep all these thought tools every week down to an absolute maximum of 700 words because I cherish your time like I cherish my own. And my mission is to convey a powerful spiritual strategy that you can employ in your life in a very short space of time that'll take you to just read a few hundred words, not 3,000 words, which can take a long time to read. That is available, and the way you get that is you just sign up for it at my website. It's www, you're never going to forget this, you don't even have to write it down, youneedarabbi.com. Okay, you got that. Y-O-U, you need a rabbi. Yep. Don't forget, rabbi has 2 B's. Wonderful to be here with you. My deepest thanks for your kind attention, and above all, my gratitude to Pastor Mark for his kindness and graciousness in allowing me to be a part of this Zichron conference. Thank you all.
All right, wasn't that fantastic? Speaking of connecting, just one second here. And Rabbi Lapin, you might be interested to know, I was looking at the people live streaming, and we have people who are listening from Australia, Malaysia, Canada, United Kingdom, Finland, South Africa, Germany, India, Denmark, Mexico, Japan, Norway, and New Zealand. And then, even from around the United States, we had people, of course, here in Washington, but Illinois, Oregon, Colorado, Montana, California, Florida, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Arizona, Texas, Arkansas, West Virginia, Idaho, North Carolina, Maryland, Iowa, Kansas, Virginia, Wisconsin, Alaska, New York, Michigan, and many more. So let's give them a big thank you for being here as well. We're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We'll be back at 1 to hear Rabbi Lapin, but be back here 1 o'clock sharp for the rest of the story. Thank you.